Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it's Tuesday, September 19th. What is it, day 572 of Vladimir Putin's obscene and barbaric venture against the people of Ukraine. And today, in an ongoing series I like to call Russians Who Aren't Russians, I'd like to introduce you to the people of the Tuva Republic. The Tuva Republic sits right up there on the border with Mongolia. And like so many of the peoples of Russia, the people that live there are not Russian and were conscripted into the Russian Empire in the middle of the 19th century. The indigenous people, the Tuvans, are a Turkic nomadic tribe who in the mid-19th century faced the Russian army, who came in and murdered, plundered, and pillaged and subjugated the people of Tuva. In 1914, when the Chinese Civil War broke out, the Tuvans took advantage of that and, like the Mongolians, rebelled against Russia and made a shot for independence. That, of course, was followed by World War I and the breakup of the Russian Empire and its replacement by the communist USSR. During that period, from about 1921 until about 1944, there existed an independent Republic of Tuva, separate from the Soviet Union. However, the Soviets had plans for the Tuvans. Throughout the 1930s, the Soviets came in, brought in Russian colonizers, brought in troops, and began a process of purge and installing puppet regimes that would do the will of the Soviets inside of Tuva. The native religions of Buddhism and shamanism and synthesis of the two, the monks of these religions were unalived. They were often herded into their Buddhist temples. The temples were locked up and they were simply burned alive if they weren't executed. During this time, on more than one occasion, the Soviets executed the leadership of the Tuvan Republic and replaced them with their own Soviet-educated military men, the most famous of whom today is, in fact, Shoigu. Shoigu is a Tuvan. From 1933 to 1944, 25 of the 26 Buddhist monasteries in Tuva were burned to the ground, most commonly with the lamas in them. The number of lamas in the country was reduced from 500 to 14. The number of shamans from 3,500 to 700. And by 1944, Stalin declared the Tuvan Soviet and the full incorporation of the Tuvan Republic into the USSR. The Tuvans got their next shot at independence when the USSR fell apart. And they declared an independent state. And in their constitution, wrote articles around self-determination, self-governance, and independence from the Russian Federation. Those articles in the Tuvan Constitution were struck from that constitution, and Tuva considered fully integrated into the Russian Federation. Can you guess under whom? Our boy right here, 20 years ago. Now, Vladimir Putin's obscene and illegal war in Ukraine has created a great deal of tension inside the Republic of Tuva. The Tuvan people are not in favor of this war and have, in fact, created a movement both to oppose it and to move for independence from the Russian Federation. The new Tuva movement seeks to separate itself from the Russian Federation and declare independence as a member of the Free Nations League. And the Free Nations League is basically a consortium of political activists across the Russian Federation. We can call these folks Russians who aren't Russian, who want independence from Moscow, who do not want to be associated with the genocide in Ukraine that they are being conscripted into. Conscription rates among the Tuvans were very high during the first part of the war. Now, this is a nation, or will be a nation of its own free and independent state, of about 260,000 people, so about 250,000 Tuvans today. 5,000 of them, 2.5% of the population, was forcibly conscripted into Putin's obscene war. In the early days of the war, tens of thousands of Tuvans left the country for Mongolia, tried to escape. That's exactly how they put it. They escaped to Mongolia. According to Nazda Mungush, a new Tuvan activist, if you're a Tuvan, you were 8 times as likely to be conscripted into the war than any Russian person was. According to her, tens of thousands of Tuvans fled the war. According to her, tens of thousands of Tuvans have flocked to the cause of Tuvan independence. This fella here, Eris, is a Tuvan activist and politician who has got himself in a lot of hot water with Moscow for signing letters opposing the war, opposing the conscription of Tuvans, and fighting for Tuvan independence. According to Shobani Kulhar here, another member of the new Tuva movement, the history of Tuva is such that as it's taught in schools, the poor Tuvan people essentially begged the Russians to take them in. And the history of the genocide and the war against the Tuvan people is not taught. In fact, there are efforts by the Russians to purge the language. And so the language is not taught in schools. Despite this, 80% of Tuvans speak the native Tumen language, practice their hybrid blend of Buddhism and shamanism. Sholbani did an interview with some young students being raised in the Russian school system. And this is what they had to say when asked if they speak Tuvan among themselves. They replied, "No, we don't speak it among ourselves." And why? Our teacher says we all have to speak Russian. This forced Russification is Moscow's MO. This is what they're doing. They use the indigenous people to try to commit genocide against other indigenous people and then move Russians in and eliminate the native languages. And the peoples of what is now Russia have had it. According to Adamir Miznit, the people of Tuva are ready for their independence. They are ready to be their own state. And a bright future is dawning for an independent Tuvan republic. Adamir, we wish you the best.